Welcome to another exciting episode of In the Know, where we interview dignitaries, we have discussions with local business people, subject experts, and residents so that you too can be in the know. We've brought back our special guest, Patrick Hagler. Patrick, as you know, is a licensed marriage and family therapist, a licensed chemical dependency counselor, and he runs the Choices program for the Council on Recovery at the St. Thomas High School here in Houston, Texas. We've spoken about addiction in general. We talked about marijuana in our last segment. Today, we want to cover vaping. Patrick, welcome, and please bring us up to speed on this whole vaping situation.
Hey, Hank, thank you for having me back. I appreciate the time. We haven't heard as much about vaping in the news recently with everything that's been going on with coronavirus and all that. But, prior to all this happening, there was a lot of coverage in the news about people dying from vaping. And we weren't really quite sure what was causing that and why people were dying. The last results I saw out of the CDC was there were a little over 2,800 people that died from a disease called EVALI, which is electronic vaping device associated lung injury. That's the name that they gave to this thing that was killing people, which they didn't really quite know what it was. In their research, what they came to is a lot of these deaths seem to be linked to vitamin E acetate, which is an ingredient that middlemen seem to be putting into cartridges of primarily THC oil, which people can vape out of devices. It's like marijuana, but in an oil form. And the vitamin E acetate that people were putting in there to cut the product to make it the product go farther was actually getting into their lungs and expanding like an oil and coating the lungs and essentially turning the lungs to like rocks. And so that seems to be the culprit in a lot of these cases, although there's still a small percentage, about 12 to 13% of those cases of people that report not using THC oil at all, just using nicotine products. So we're not out of the woods in terms of the danger of using nicotine products only as well. There still seems to be some question out there as to whether those products are actually can cause that kind of lung injury.
Oh my goodness. Well, it's April the 1st, 2020, and obviously we're all still across the country on some kind of stay-at-home or shelter-in-place or some kind of lockdown based on the coronavirus. And now you're sharing with us that the vaping causes all kinds of situation with the lungs. And isn't the lungs what the coronavirus is shutting down or attacking in people?
Yes, absolutely. And I actually was just reading an article yesterday about how vapors and smokers in particular are more susceptible to getting the coronavirus just in terms of using other people's devices and things like that. But the one thing that I really wanted to get across to parents about vaping is the seriousness of nicotine on the developing adolescent brain. In our past discussions, we talked about the development of the prefrontal cortex and high-risk behaviors that arrest the development of that part of the brain, which we don't want our kids, which we don't want happening to our kids. And nicotine itself does the same thing as marijuana in terms of the dopamine spike that causes the brain to go offline and the prefrontal cortex development to go offline. It doesn't stay in the system quite as long as marijuana, but it does the same thing. So if you have someone that's consistently using nicotine as an adolescent, the same thing is happening to that development of that prefrontal cortex. It's not happening. And another thing that that is really important to know is that it is not a harmless thing, nicotine to the growing adolescent brain, because what it does is it it primes the brain. It actually, the exposure to nicotine to that kind of young, fragile brain, it actually primes that brain for the to experience the pleasurable, the numbing effects of dopamine. So really what that means is that kid is priming their brain through the use of nicotine to be ready for the next thing that comes on down the road. So if a kid has been using nicotine for a while in high school, that brain is primed for, and it's ready for that next dopamine spike that's going to come. Whatever that's going to be, whatever that kid is going to experiment with, whatever it comes down, that kid is going to have a very pleasurable experience in a way that another kid that has never used nicotine would have. So the difference would be, let's say you have one kid that has never used nicotine, has not started that brain priming process before, and let's say he tries marijuana for the first time. Likely what you're going to hear that kid say is, I didn't feel anything. Like, I don't even know why people do this. I didn't feel anything, and it's just kind of stupid. Versus another kid, let's say, that has never tried marijuana, but has primed his brain through the use of nicotine over time to be sensitive to dopamine spikes. That kid that smokes marijuana for the first time is likely to feel, what? He's likely to say something like, wow, that was incredible. Like, where can I get more of that? When can I do that again? Because his brain's ready. His brain has been primed. And that's really the danger of nicotine, is that it is a gateway drug for everything else to come.
How tragic. And we, fortunately, smoking has decreased over the last 20, 30 years, but I don't believe that the data is in on what the youth is doing now. With this vaping, it's probably even worse. So what are the substitutes for getting that high? What are the healthy substitutes?
Sure. Well, getting natural dopamine spikes is what is what we're designed to do. We're designed to get these little rewards for doing things that are good for our survival. So things like exercise. Exercise is really good. Listening to music, playing music, reading, writing, engaging with friends. All of those things are healthy ways to get like the experience of dopamine without artificially getting it from an artificial source. And that's really where it is sort of the foundation of addiction, is we're creating these artificial dopamine spikes in a way that this very primitive part of our brain doesn't understand, that this is an unhealthy dopamine spike versus a healthy dopamine spike. Doesn't understand. And over time, that can create a pattern and can be really hard to break.
How do you create an environment, say at your home, to nurture or prompt those positive dopamine spikes? I mean, you talked about music and playing music and writing and and exercise. Is there? I mean, when children become locked to the video games and the television set or the movies or whatever it may be, are we hindering that because, or any of those positive for them?
Excuse me. Well, nothing's really good or bad. Things aren't good or bad. Things just are. So it's about balance. So a little bit of TV, a little bit of gaming, a little bit of online activity is fine. A lot of it is harmful. Just like anything else, just for adults, alcohol. A little alcohol is fine for adults. A lot of alcohol can be very dangerous. So for parents, I would say engaging, modeling healthy behavior for your kids. Are you the kind of parent that sits in your office, works all day, and doesn't take time out to do other activities that are balancing? That would be something to look at. Or looking at our own, like what are we modeling for our kids, and then really making it a priority to engage with your kids, even if they say no. You're still the parent, so you can say, hey, guess what? We're all playing Trivial Pursuit tonight, something like that, and really taking the time to spend that quality time with your kids, because now we have the opportunity to do that right now in a way that we have never had before, and we may never have again. So really taking advantage of this time to get to know our kids, to get to know our spouses, to get to spend time with our family. So really a unique opportunity, and I really encourage parents to make that a priority.
What an excellent comment. It is true. We may never have this opportunity again. I hope we don't, quite frankly. We don't want to be on this kind of lockdown, so to speak. But maybe this will teach us to smell the roses with our children and with our spouses, something that we've just all been too busy running around doing everything else. So you may be right on the money there, Patrick, as to this is the right time to engage. So let me ask this question. The kids, the youngsters, if you will, that say, well, the vaping is okay because I'm just using these flavored somethings and there's no marijuana in it or THC and there's no nicotine or it sounds to me like, and I don't know, I haven't done the research, but it sounds to me like it's a bunch of hogwash. I mean, there's got to be anything that you're smoking and inhaling into your lungs has got to be bad for you, period. No.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely, and I get that question a lot, and it's really it's not a logical it's not a logical argument to say, well, it's safer than smoking. Well, did you smoke before? No. Well, then it's not the same. You know, it's e-cigarettes were created as a method, as a harm reduction method for people that smoke cigarettes. So if you are already smoking cigarettes, using an e-cigarette instead of a cigarette is a better option. But if you're a kid that has never used tobacco, never used cigarettes, and now you're using this highly powerful nicotine delivery system to introduce yourself to nicotine, that's a terrible option. You know, I'm thinking of a stat that I have on a slide in one of my presentations, but cigarette smoke, actual combustible cigarette smoke, has about 5,000 to 7,000 chemicals in the smoke, many of them carcinogenic. And e-cigarettes have about 20 different chemicals in there. Some of them that we are discovering are carcinogenic, but if you're going to go from 5,000 to 7,000 to 20, that's a great choice for a smoker. If you're going from a kid that's never used tobacco, if so, you're going from inhaling fresh oxygen in and out all day to now inhaling 20 different chemicals in and out all day, that's a terrible choice. That's an absolutely terrible choice. And we don't actually know what those chemicals are doing, but what we're finding now with the studies that we're doing is that it's an aerosol. It's not vapor, it's an aerosol. It's an aerosol that is suspended with very fine particles of metals and different things. And I think what we're going to see down the road is what we saw with cigarettes many years ago, which early on cigarettes was touted as something that was not only safe, but maybe even helpful to people. And then, you know, years down the road with all the research, we discovered, well, hey, you know, this actually kills you. And I think we're heading down that same road with e-cigarettes, and that the research is coming in that it actually is carcinogenic and has long-term health benefits, but they just haven't been around long enough for us to get an empirical data on that to say that. But I think that we are heading down that road. So definitely push back on that argument that kids are saying that it's safe. It is not safe. It is safer than smoking. But, you know, if the kid wasn't a smoker already, then that argument doesn't hold any water. So really not a good idea. And on top of that, you take a kid that has been using e-cigarettes for a period of time, that same kid goes to college, now has no parental supervision, is at a party and maybe has a couple of beers or something. That kid is very likely to make the jump to cigarette smoking, because all those extra thousands of chemicals in cigarette smoke will give them that rush like they got the first time they used an e-cigarette. So I read a study recently that says that e-cigarette users are 4 times more likely to become actual smokers later on. So it's the next logical step in terms of addiction to go to the next thing, which for an e-cigarette user would be cigarettes.
How terrible. So this thing that supposedly is to keep you from, but that's the excuse you hear them say, well, at least I don't smoke. I'm just doing these e-cigarettes. And as you so properly pointed out, well, if you never smoked, then you're just, you've taken the wrong step to begin with. But so, Patrick, where can parents go for more information, and what resources, even locally, are there here to help them navigate through this and to be able to work with their adolescents and their youngsters to keep them safer?
Sure. There's a really good website that has great information for parents, real research-based information. It's called parentsagainst.vaping.org. So you can go there and you can get lots of really good information. The counseloonrecovery.org has a section specifically, I think it's called Vaping 101, something like that. It's got a lot of really good information on there, how to talk to your child about it. There's also a website called For a Kid. If a kid is interested in quitting or trying to quit, there's a website called becomeanx.org, and that website will send them text messages. It's like a coach to help them quit. So it's almost like a virtual recovery coach to help them meet whatever the date is that they're trying to make to quit, and to help them stay quit. Really helpful stuff.
Well, that's excellent. We've run those addresses across the bottom of the screen. Patrick, do you have any other advice that you can give us before we sign off today? Especially now that parents are having so much time at home with their children, do we need to practice some tough love also? I mean, in other words, I understand discussion's important, and you said they're very good litigators, these youngsters today, and so on. But at what point can you, if things aren't making sense, at what point can a little bit of forcefulness in the proper manner be appropriate?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great question. And that is one thing that I encourage parents to do, is to really have a conversation with their spouse, get on the same page with your spouse, to really get clear on what the rules are for your household. A lot of times parents will say to me that, well, we've never talked about it before, but they know they're not supposed to do that. But do they really? Do they really know what the rules are in the house? So being crystal clear on, in this house, we don't use alcohol, we don't use nicotine, we don't use any of these things. And if you happen to make that bad choice, these are the consequences, and you spell it out. So there's no surprise. The kid doesn't come back to you and say, well, you never told me and I didn't know. No, you knew because we talked about it. So that's really important, to really, so the kids know what the rules are in that house, not the house next door, or not my buddy Timmy's house. In this house, under this roof, this is what we do. Very important. What I would also say too is, I really encourage parents to not make the assumption that, well, I was a kid too. When I was a kid, I did these things too. I smoked some marijuana and I drank and went to parties, and look at me, I came out, we're okay. That's a real dangerous assumption to make, because the marijuana that parents smoked 20, 30 years ago is an entirely different product than the marijuana that is being created today. And especially the concentrates and what kids are vaping. You're talking about something that the THC level in marijuana, when parents smoked it, maybe 2 or 3%, versus THC concentrates now, excuse me, that could be 90 or 95% THC. So you're talking about a very, very different product. And so I really encourage parents to not make that assumption that since I did it and I was okay, that my kid will be too, because that's not always the case.
Wow. So it's important then for the parents to have this information. What you just said, I was not aware of the difference in concentrations, et cetera. I've read some things about that, but my goodness, it would be like saying, well, children, I didn't eat rat poisoning when I was growing up, but that's what you're eating today. I mean, it's such an extreme. It is so scary. Well, Patrick, thank you for being with us in this episode of In the Know and bringing us with closer to and better knowledge of what's going on in this whole vaping situation.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on and giving me the time to talk about these things. Not easy being a parent in the 21st century, but with the exposure that our kids have to so many different things, it's more important than ever that we know what they're up to.
Absolutely great advice from a very knowledgeable and informed person. Everyone, once again, you're in the know because we bring you subject experts like Patrick Hagler. See you soon.